All right, let's get this thing started. Thank you everybody for joining D2C Leadership Now for the month of December. Got a fun conversation coming up here with Dana Smith from Lasko. We're going to talk about data silos. Before we do that, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you have questions during this conversation that we're having, please use the Q&A through Zoom, and we'll try and get to those. Either if it's topical, we might try and address it right there, or we'll try and leave some time at the end for some questions. Feel free to put those in. And then also at the very end, I'll remind everybody, hopefully at the end, we'll have a little bit of a survey after we get through this. Just a couple of quick questions, if you don't mind taking the time. That's really helpful for us because it helps us to make it better next time. So without further ado, I believe you can see my screen now, and just a quick teaser for next month. Next month, we're going to be joined by Jeff Cowan from Accelerate 360, and I'm realizing I forgot to put his name on this slide, so I need to fix that. But Jeff is he's the Vice President of IT over at Accelerate 360. Fascinating company. Own a bunch of different media brands that you might be familiar with if you look at that list, but they're also a 3PL, and they are also a seller online. They've got it really is a fascinating business. Lots of variables going on there. And we're going to talk a little bit about the business side of making the IT case for scaling the business next month. So hope you can join us for that. This month, we are joined by Dana Smith from Lasko Fans. And Dana, I'm thankful that you could join us here today. And yeah, I'm looking forward to this conversation. So maybe as a starting point, if you don't mind, maybe giving us a little bit of background, kind of how you got your start in your career, and we'll go from there.
Yep. Thanks for having me, Michael. Appreciate it. Yeah. So I go way back. Really my start was beginning of my career. I was really trained as an electrical engineer, and I was working for an electrical company. We were making semiconductors, but I found my true passion was data, and I spent a lot of time. When you're building semiconductors, it's all about volumes of data analyzed in the manufacturing process. And I found that I spend more of my time on getting the data, organizing the data, and realized that electrical engineering wasn't my calling, and transitioned to really a startup that was implementing an ERP system that was in the similar kind of business, but completely different organization. And that's how I got started a long time ago. The rest is history.
Now you've worked for a number of different companies over the years, right? I
have a lot that probably I don't want to remember at this point, but a lot that were brands I think you'd recognize. Velcro is one that's actually nearby here. It's a company that I think most people think is owned by 3M or one of the big manufacturers, but they are a standalone company, and they're right here nearby in Manchester, New Hampshire. And then of course, years later, worked for a company that became Newell Brands, which owned a huge number of consumer product brands that we'd all recognize: Mr. Coffee, Yankee Candle, First Alert, and Coleman, for example, amongst a bunch of them. So, yeah.
So we're here today. We're going to talk about sort of scaling e-commerce and profit beyond siloed systems, and so that's going to be kind of the theme. But I wonder if maybe you can just start by sharing a little bit about how long you've been with Lasko, and sort of what your experience was when you first came there, and kind of how you guys have been looking at this whole challenge.
Yeah, so I've been with Lasko coming up on the 5-year mark, which is, it seems like a lot longer, just because there's been a lot of learnings here. For those that don't recognize the brand naturally, you'd probably see the product in some of the major retailers. Michael mentioned fans, but there's a lot more to the business other than, yeah, there you go. Yep, very good. Yep. Fans, heaters, air purifiers, anything that really has a fan in there. And, the company was privately held. All this is public knowledge on the website. Was sold back about 7 or 8 years ago, something like that. And we've been on a journey ever since then, obviously big retailers, and eventually started looking at how do we fulfill some of those requirements for, D2C. And, a lot went into that over, a number of years at this point.
Yeah. But so certainly to the extent that you're able is sort of the qualifier for any of these questions. But could you share a little bit about sort of the transition of moving from a lot of store replenishment types of B2B type of business to e-commerce, and kind of what some of those sales channels were and what some of those initial challenges that you guys were facing looked like?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're probably very traditional challenges for a company like us that really has been in the, call it the 3P model, where we're shipping our product to the retailers. They're dealing with the distribution aspects of it. We looked at a lot of different scenarios over a period of time. And in my mind, I was always focused on how do I make the business nimble, right? So we looked at scenarios where 3PLs are involved, doing it ourselves, which is always an interesting challenge, and evolved into a scenario where we thought that it's going to be giving us the best combination of all those inputs.
Mm-hmm. So what sort of sales channels in the early days were you guys dealing with from an e-commerce perspective?
I would say, the bigger e-com retailers that we're all familiar with. And, ultimately, as this battle for e-com versus bricks and mortar came along, we were faced with challenges of, well, those retailers want us to expand our own channels. And so we started looking at how we were going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a simple challenge to sort of pick up the phone and know where to call to get the answer. We had to look at it and really pulled in all different inputs from resources that we had access to.
Right. So you're dealing with you're dealing with marketplaces, you're dealing with websites, you're dealing with major online retailers, right? That are not open marketplaces, right? So everything from an integration standpoint, dealing with APIs, dealing with EDI, perhaps dealing with flat file integrations, right? Dealing with a lot of chaos in a lot of different areas, I'm assuming, correct?
That's correct. And EDI has been a part of the retail space for a long time. I thought back to even my very first role in IT, where we were doing EDI then, where it was really sort of a new concept. Today it's table stakes. You have to have some awareness of EDI, and so we tend to look at that as our primary communication channel, because we know that once it's in place, there's very little manual intervention at that point, and that's the model we want to espouse, because the manual piece of this business is always a challenge. It doesn't matter what business it is. If you're in the CPG space, it's always about minimizing touch to the extent that you can.
Right. So endpoints on the sales side, we've got many different types, right? And then on again, to the extent that you're able, can you talk a little bit about sort of, as you looked at the D2C space and looked at your options from a fulfillment standpoint, what were the different endpoints that you had to deal with there?
I mean, I think we were probably a little bit naive in the sense that we didn't really know where to go there. We do fulfill out of a number of facilities, and that number has expanded over time. But we were also looking for partners that could handle the D2C piece of it, and ended up sort of choosing an approach that was novel in the sense that it leveraged relationships that we currently have, and was able to fulfill the requirements that without us building up a huge amount of infrastructure. Again, it was about being nimble, and that's part of pretty much everything we do, just because in the end this business is such that you're at the mercy of the consumer buying, and no matter what product you're in, that can change. And so you want to be able to respond as rapidly as possible.
Right. Yeah. So you have I guess what I'm trying to do is sort of paint the picture of all the variables, because we're going to talk about data silos, right? So
Yeah, correct.
you have internal systems that drive your own DCs, and then you've partnered for some of your fulfillment as well. So you have external entities that have their own systems, right? And then you also have your own systems of record.
Yes, that's correct. We do. Yeah.
So we've got sort of a pretty big web of endpoints here to deal with. You. So can you talk a little bit about what were some of the initial challenges as you looked at sort of how does this whole thing work together? What were some of the silos that you were seeing that were problematic for you, that needed to be figured out?
I think we had, there was a slew of them. I think immediately about master data, because ultimately, where we primarily held and maintained systems internally with limited sort of outside interaction and support, now we are depending on external parties. And so where we probably could have responded quickly to issues if we missed them through, call it, lack of testing or things that we ran into as part of implementation. Now it's harder. So it forces you to think through some of these things. Master data is huge. Obviously it's any part of the manufacturing business, but from our perspective, that's probably the biggest challenge that we saw, particularly as you're bringing partners in that don't know, your SKU structure. What does this really mean? Is there some significance to this value? So it was, and I think it probably continues to be one of our more interesting challenges. We're much better at it than we used to be, but I would say that's probably one of our biggest challenges when we were looking at this process.
So master data in terms of being able to communicate with all the different endpoints, right?
Correct.
What about content itself? Because selling into the online world is a little bit of a different challenge than sort of just putting a product in somebody that they in front of somebody that they can lift and touch and feel, right? That's all the attributes that they need. But as it relates to digital content, did you run into some challenges there as well?
I think there was probably a little there. I mean, we use a service to maintain much of that data. We probably were lucky in that sense because we had embarked down the road of leveraging this technology to help us even before we were seriously thinking about going in the D2C direction. Perhaps it was somewhere along the way had recognized it, but from my perspective, I don't know that I necessarily connect the two together and realize that, hey, this is a path that's going to save us a tremendous amount of work. So
okay. So you made some decisions, right, to kind of move in a direction of pulling this all together. And you saw that master data was a challenge. What were some of the other, as you were brought in and you kind of, I believe anyway, just based on having known you for a while, what I understand is you were brought in to kind of help figure out what this future path is going to look like. And so master data was a problem. But what were some of the other challenges that were sort of staring you in the face that just had to be resolved?
I would say the next one that comes to mind is probably just communication. You're dealing with partners that you don't know a lot about. You've got to figure out how to set up communication paths, data flows, ensuring that error checking is in place when there's a communication path set up based on the partnership. We found that even what we would consider sort of standard terminology for the CPG space, when you're dealing with partners that are fulfillment partners, for example, those don't necessarily mean anything. And so those are challenges that you face. And again, I think in our worlds, there was always a very sort of inward environment from an IT perspective, and now you're exposing that outside. So some of the tools that you would use to support interaction with external vendors, just weren't familiar here, and so we had to solve some of those issues.
Okay. All right. So as you started to kind of move the ball forward, then what were some of the primary things that you were looking for in sort of a solution to start to pull these endpoints together, what were some of the most important components to you as you went through that decision-making process?
I think there's probably a number of them. I think in terms of partners that we can count on, that we can develop a relationship with. I think that we also wanted to be able to have access to data that they would provide as part of the relationship that gave us some insight as to how they're performing. The traditional sort of business metrics that we all think about in a manufacturing company, like, demand, inventory posture, velocity, those kinds of things all became part of what we needed to have access to. And we found that that's, even though you might think that those again are table stakes, they're not necessarily as easy as you might think, and access is not as easy as you'd expect.
That's a really interesting point. So as you figuring out that inventory posture, any CFO will tell you that that's a really, really big deal, right? Because tying up cash is it can make or break a company, and more often probably break. So in terms of understanding where you put inventory and how much to put there, if you sort of back that truck up a little bit and try and figure out how you make those decisions, a lot of that comes down to understanding demand. So you've got a lot of different inputs, or because you've got all these different channels, prior to kind of moving forward and removing some of those data silos, how did you go about, or how did the organization go about figuring out what does demand look like, and how do we figure out what demand, particularly regionally, is going to look like?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We've gone through a lot of evolution there. I think we started off with a certain level of sort of predictability because the business has been around for so long. So tribal knowledge is a big part of that. But eventually you realize that tribal knowledge isn't guaranteed, particularly in a business that's continuing to evolve, like all CPG companies do. And so we started looking at different technologies that could help us with that, and probably more importantly, different data sources. In this space, we often talk about point of sale data, which is really representative of what what your customers are doing in their retail channels, and that becomes very important for us to understand what is happening out in the marketplace. I often think about a number of years ago, I worked for a business that sold fishing tackle, and fishing tackle is a very interesting category because it's in some sense it's an inflation or economy resistant category, because you can buy fishing gear or fishing lures or fishing bait for a fairly small amount of money. But what you find is that fishermen are very loyal to their brands, and so that matters when the economy is going in different directions. And so trying to understand what really is going on in the space at the retail level over a weekend that's good weather is very important, so we understand what the inventory posture needs to be in those stores and their DCs, et cetera.
So in the early days, was it a lot of manual reporting then to try and understand what the demand on those channels was?
Oh yeah, most certainly.
Spreadsheet Olympics type stuff.
Yep, spreadsheets are your friend for sure.
Yep. Okay. Interesting. All right. So I guess one of the other questions I would have then is, you've got demand happening on sales channels. You've got you're figuring out how to deal with fulfillment and inventory placement, but you also have your core systems of record that ultimately kind of run your business, right?
That's correct.
So what sort of data challenges did you have as it relates to your core systems of record, and what sort of information did they need that you had to pull from all these different environments?
I think it's the normal data that you think about in terms of just the manufacturing process. We wanted to understand demand. That plays into just sort of the planning piece. there's sort of the triad of, sales, inventory, demand, and the challenge there, again, as I've said before, it's about being nimble. So the fresher the data that you can get, the better off you're going to be. And so I think all that plays into, let's crawl, walk, run, figure out the basics here, and then as we start to see what that looks like, decide what the steps forward are. We often talk about the fact that perfect is the enemy of good, and so we try to get the value out the door and drive us to a place that's better as we consume more of what we're getting out of this particular initiative. So
yeah. So you did mention crawl, walk, run, and that was actually one of my questions here, because you've got so many different things going on, so many different systems to kind of pull together. How do you make the decision of, so the crawl aspect of this, how do you know where to start on this, and how did you guys choose to do that?
I think, obviously the demand for a solution was there. We have a pretty savvy group of folks here that, have been around the system space for a while. We looked at, combinations of, benefits. Can we see our way clear to arrive at a solution that would work end to end? Can we deliver this? And, it's, we looked at a number of solutions and decided that, we had a path that could work and didn't require, a massive lift to get there. And that probably is really the combination that came to a point where we had an answer.
Okay. Did you sort of look at that from the perspective of like your core systems of record outward, or did you look at that from the demand channels and kind of flow that down? Or like, I'm just trying to get inside your head a little bit and understand.
Yeah, I would say it's more on the demand side. I think that our core system, the one advantage that we've had is that it's been around for a long time. We have a core team of people that know how to run it. Where we feel like we get into some area of less confidence is when you're looking at new solutions, and what is it going to take for us to make the two marry together in a nice way that is going to establish some portability. We operate in such a way that it's we're not resource intensive, so we're always thinking about, well, if we go this route, what kind of care and feeding is this going to take, and how much effort is going to take to get us over the top of the hill, and that becomes part of the calculus for any technology decision that we take on.
Okay. And as you looked at that, what were some of the key criteria in your decision-making process in terms of, in order to be able to bring all these endpoints together, like what are the core components? Like what has to be in place in order for us to be able to scale this business?
I would say, predictability in terms of what the, call it order to cash process is. I think in terms of sort of those core, call them core 4 processes that it requires that you have in place for a business like this. Order to cash is, that's why we're here, right? So we want to make sure that we have a reliable flow of order intake that flows out to the appropriate fulfillment partners. Invoicing goes out and we can collect the cash. And so all those pieces, we have to check those check boxes to make sure that, we have confidence that we can get there. A lot of it is in the relationship building with a partner that's involved to understand, have you done this before? Can we see our way clear based on the skills that we know we have and the path that would allow us to, turn the spigot flow on, if you will.
Yep. So order to cash, I think you mentioned that there were like 3 or 4. Any other major KPIs or measurements come to mind in terms of things that you were watching?
I think it was, in this space, it's all about the normal order to cash metrics, right? Velocity, how long does it take for each step to actually happen? Again, that crawl, walk, run process, we expect that it's not quite where we want it to be at the beginning, but then as we start to ramp up, then it becomes more about, well, what was it last month, last quarter? Are we getting better? What is the optimum value for, call it inventory level, stock outs? Are we meeting the SLA on the service delivery expectation of the channel, those kinds of things?
Okay. So as you move past the crawl and you move into the walk and you start to pick up momentum, right? What are some of the things that allow you to be able to pick up speed and expand this business at a more rapid rate?
I think it's the normal sort of growth of the business. Is it's adding more trading partners, it's adding more customers as you feel like you have velocity. We talk a lot about the silos here, and so I think in terms of when I think about turning the knob up, respectively, figuratively, I think in terms of we will stress the system when we're doing that. And what do I mean by that? Well, I think in terms of any kind of new process where you've just turned it on, people are getting comfortable with it. Are they doing anything when you think about the order to cash process that is offline because they felt like they needed to as they were getting familiar with things? That's great when you're just getting started, but as soon as you start to turn the flywheel up and you're going faster, you can't do that. And so I would tend to see that is going to be where you're going to break things. And so you have to be very mindful of the fact that velocity is starting to climb up. We're going to expose those things and we'll need time to remediate them. So that's probably the walk. And then as we get more comfortable with walking and you're starting to run, then you got to have confidence that, those things have been eliminated essentially.
So if I was to paraphrase that, it sounds as though automation is a pretty key component of that, right? And sort of systematically going about and removing any of the manual processes that are involved.
That's correct. And exposing any that probably weren't documented or part of the original design. They just sort of, sprout up over time. And, it's part of the reason you probably want to not have big gaps between the crawl, walk, run phase. You want to make sure and push it as fast as you can without breaking the business, because eventually you want velocity. Yeah,
automation is a really interesting thing because we've used examples in the past when talking to others that it's one thing to be able to say, hey, we can generate a purchase order and do it in 3 or 4 steps that require a human to make decisions in the process.
Correct.
That's one thing. Doing it entirely programmatically and automatically is an entirely different level of scale and sophistication. And it's interesting to think about like what, or maybe even ask the question to you of what were some of those manual processes that either were surprises or that you had to ferret out in this thing, because business over the years, you go through all of these levels of your journey and growth, and a lot of times people sort of paper over the cracks, if you will, via people, right? And therefore the manual processes come into play. But when you're trying to automate things, there can't be any of that interaction. So like, what were some of those ahas or those?
It's hard to think about what comes to mind, but I know, for example, and I don't think that was something that we saw recently, but I know that I've seen scenarios where, the warehouse folks would track things that your main system is supposed to be doing because they didn't have the confidence there, right? And so that's easy to do when the volume isn't high, but then when you start to increase velocity, you just can't do that anymore. And so you may see that manifest itself in different places where they were capturing data that need to be published, and then you find out that, oh, well, now we've crossed over this level of business that we can't do that anymore. And on the IT side, we'll look at that and ask the question, well, why were you doing it to begin with? Because that's what your core system is doing. So I think you can see all kinds of different scenarios where that would come to mind. I often think in terms of manual things that people do. You mentioned the purchase order, for example. I I remember some years back that we had an accounts payable function that kept track of all kinds of details that was offline, that was recurring expenses where there was no POs involved. And that's really helpful when you're not tracking everything in the system, because they would come back to us and say, hey, we know that you see this invoice every month and it hasn't come in this month, right? So that information wasn't being tracked online. So there's some value to it, but in the end, if you get to the point where you just don't have the people that can manually do that kind of work, it's going to be something that's going to fall by the wayside at some point. And just does the business recognize that capability has been lost along the way? I would apply the same thing on the warehouse side, for example.
Well, it's interesting to think about, so the topic again is data silos. And as I process that a little bit, and I think about sort of the spreadsheet Olympics that we often will see people using and so forth, if you really think about it, people are using spreadsheets and people are using these manual processes to combine the data in disparate systems that they don't have access to in a single spot. Right. So what are some of those other scenarios where you found excessive use of spreadsheets?
I think it's in all kinds of places, and it's hard to even articulate where they are. Where I see them expose themselves is exactly what you just said, is when you're trying to bring together multiple data sources. And I think about it in the context of analytics, right? So I often recall, the first CIO I worked for, which is a number of years ago, we were doing a lot of project implementations, and we'd have a lot of discussion about how to ensure success there. And one of the points that he made to me back then, and I remember even today, is that the two things that will impact your success on these kinds of projects, which is pretty much any IT project, are interfaces and reports. And today, if you fast forward back, you translate that to integrations and analytics, right? And so when you think about the analytics piece, if you don't have access to the data, you can't bring it together in one format that it becomes valuable information. So it becomes hard, and that reduces your velocity. I think probably the bigger issue, and it's a point that I champion regularly, is that if we're not all looking at the same single source of truth, we'll make bad decisions. And so that's the piece that we always have to be out on the lookout for, because any scenario we're looking at inconsistent data, we'll make bad decisions. And that gets you back to, well, how do we all look at the same data? We eliminate those silos.
I think I might quote you on that one. If we're not all looking at the single source of truth, we make bad decisions.
I think you can go to bank on that one.
Yeah.
That's a guarantee.
Well, and this is just sort of an interesting realization. I mean, it actually makes me want to kind of talk to our team and just say, one of our most common questions for our customers probably should be, where are you using spreadsheets? Because as an integration platform, that should be something that we're solving for. Yeah,
and I mean, I don't want to give spreadsheets a bad name, because they have their place, but I don't consider them as a data source, right? They're an analytical tool that you use for, call it, one-time analysis. But as soon as you're doing it multiple times,
I think that's very true. As soon as a spreadsheet becomes an operational tool, then you've got a problem you need to solve for.
Yeah, and it's always an interesting point. I think back to my, this is another person I reported to when I first started in IT. We just implemented a new ERP system again, talk about crawl, walk, run. And what he was doing is, anytime somebody needed some kind of, reporting out of the system, he'd do it in a spreadsheet. And I remember all those years ago saying to him at the time, they're going to ask you that for the same report next month. So the more of these things you're doing, the more you're just not going to be able to do anything else except for generate those things. So the failure we see is, okay, I get it when you're trying to get this thing out the door because it's an urgent requirement for this analysis, whatever it is. But then you got to figure out down the road when you're going to take that on and make that part of your core capabilities, because you just won't be able to do that every time.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. So So let's zoom up just a little bit as you're thinking through the process you've been on or the journey you've been on over the last 5 years or so. What has surprised you about this?
Good question. I think probably the thing that most comes to mind is how when you get to the next milestone, whatever that is, call it an annual milestone, you take a look back, how it's very different than what you envisioned the 12 months before. And that's probably partially because, we don't know, but it's also because of what's happened in the industry, and things have changed. If you went back a few years, would you have seen, Amazon where they are, the other retailers where they are? I would submit the answer is no. And so again, it reminds us of how important it is for us to remain close to the data and the business and remain nimble and be able to, pivot on a dime if that's what's required to keep the customer happy.
So I've heard you use that word nimble a few times now. That seems to be a recurring theme.
Yeah, it's very important because I think in terms of just the kinds of people that are buying our products, and this really goes back to anytime you think about retail, things can change. And so how do you protect against that? You have to stay right on top of the data. When things change, you have to be able to react in any kind of direction. Your demand could be up or down, right?
Mm-hmm.
So and I think when you think about, you've asked about data, and we've talked about interfaces and integrations. I think those naturally create certain delays in the way that business process happens. So when you think about data being updated on a daily basis versus hourly, well, a day adds lag, right? And so you're not seeing that. So to the extent that you can reduce that window down, the business will be better for it.
Yeah. That might fall into this category, but one of the things I really like to ask here is like, so, if somebody's just getting into this space and kind of stepping into a situation like you did 5 years ago, what advice would you give to them in terms of where to start and how to start figuring it out?
Yeah, it's a really good question. If I go back 5 years, I'm not sure I'd want to invite anybody to go 5 years, but what I would say is what's really important for anybody that's starting on a journey like this, or any journey that's in the space, is to be very clear with your stakeholders around what results they're expecting. What is it? Let's be very clear on what's your market success. We can talk about objectives, and so we understand in a general way, but what are the results that you're really shooting for? And that will be ultimately your litmus test as you're evaluating designs and partners and solutions. Always go back to make sure that, because it gets muddied over time. You're looking at all different scenarios that can help you get to the same end game, but you lose visibility to what the original, expectation was. So you want to always have that in mind so that you can test it as you, to the point where you're signing on dotted lines and actually flipping switches, et cetera.
Okay. Question here from the audience. If you had to do this over again, what are the 2 or 3 things you do differently?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Couple of things that I would do differently. Well, I think I would probably take a step back and evaluate our core capabilities more closely up front. When you join an organization, so you're coming into it with some life experience, but it's all new, right? And so I think I would look at very closely at what we can do today and what our strengths and weaknesses are, primarily because when you're new, you just don't know the organization that well, and that becomes a big piece. So I would do that. I would also probably look at what your existing relationships are with with vendors and partners that are in the same space, and use that to walk into where you really want to be. We did a little bit of that. I think in hindsight, I probably would have done a little more of it. It's always a risk reward conversation around how much time you invest in these things versus going outside and looking at the broader marketplace. Companies tend to be very insular, and so they want to do things internally, and sometimes it makes sense to go outside. But I would definitely leverage existing relationships more if I was going to do it again.
Okay. So you and your team have done a lot of work. How do you see that the D2C space is impacting your brand image as it relates to, as you guys have been going to market? Are you seeing that selling directly to consumers has changed the image of the brand at all?
I don't know that I think we're too early on the journey to say that yet. We're continuing, as you know, to evolve and expand. I think in the places that we've done a lot of transactional volume, I don't think it's changed much. I think it's an expectation. Mm-hmm. I think if you asked me in 12 to 18 months, I would say we would expect that it has evolved.
Okay. A follow-up question, actually, I think going back to you had a bit of advice here of being really clear with stakeholders about what they were expecting. What, as you, again, to the extent that you can share, what were some of those original goals that kind of came out? And can you give us an idea of, like, are we talking about numbers? Are we talking about sort of lofty expectations? How precise were they? How did you shape up that?
I think it's, if I had to lump it into one sort of easy to grapple with term, I would say it's probably, call it core capabilities, because the company had been very sort of volume driven, and this was a completely different concept. But mm-hmm. We all know where the retail space has evolved to, and we wanted to be in the game, and so it's really about capabilities. When you're in this kind of business, particularly as broad and sprawling as this one is, it becomes about, can we deliver this capability and make money at it, and how do we best do that without kind of dragging the business down into the level that we don't want to be, where it's all manual, right? I mean, you just can't do that. So we have to figure out a way to do it in an automated way that doesn't disrupt, what we're currently doing. So it's got to be additive, if you will. So
yeah, well, that's really interesting. So, and this is maybe pertinent to some of the things that we're thinking about right now. But like, if you had to, I mean, you're an executive making decisions around the IT side of the business, and you interact with the other executives in the business. If you had to sort of summarize, what are the 3 or 4 most important things to the executive team as it relates to the D2C space, what do you think those would be?
Wow, 3 to 4 is a lot.
Okay, 2 or 3 maybe,
yeah,
or even one. What is the most important thing as you've been sort of starting this journey and kind of moving through it? Is it, I actually don't want to lead the jury here, so
I think that's fair. I mean, look, it's really about having the capabilities, right? I mean, you want to be, when you think about it, I always make the point that in this space, my recommendation is always to put yourselves in the shoes of your customers, right? And so, when you allow yourself to do that, you start to think about, well, what does the big, call it big 10 retailers, what do they want to be? Well, today, if you ask them, I think you'd find that they want to be omni-channel, right? They want to be able to sell to their customer in any way that the consumer wants to be able to buy. So is that on an app on their phone? Do they want to walk through a store? Do they want to, do they want to be able to buy on Facebook? I mean, all of the above. And so in the end, those are the kinds of capabilities that we need to be able to provide so that they can be successful with their consumer. We all know that everybody, the 800-pound gorilla now in the e-com space is Amazon. And so how do we behave competitively as a retailer with Amazon and that experience? And so so I think that's ultimately what we're trying to do. And be the best that we can be as part of our company charter. And so I think that's really core in every one of the executives' minds when they think about this space.
So I would almost summarize that by saying, like, meeting the customer where they're at, having the core capabilities to meet the customer where they're at, regardless of really where they want to buy.
Right. And it's not as simple as we might think. It's we think in terms of sort of online versus in store, but now this this hybrid buy online but pick up in store, right? So it's every channel that you can think of, and maybe there are some that we haven't even thought of that's waiting for somebody to knock that door down. So
yeah. Where do you think customers want to go next on that topic?
I have no idea. I mean, I think it's my wife jokes with me now because she's finally gotten turned on to being able to order from an app on her phone. She makes the point that you've created a monster. And so I don't know. I mean, I think it's really about where do you have the opportunity to see that buy button, whether it's literally in a store, where you're picking things up because you see it and it's an impulse buy, or is it on TV, watching TV, something pops up, I want to be able to click on that with my remote. I think it's up to people that are way smarter than me to answer that question, but I believe that we're not limited at this point to the ways that we can execute commerce. I think the beginning of it.
Yeah. So I want to come back to this question of, like, what's important to the executive team. So meeting the customer where they're at and having the capability to do that is definitely one. One that's been coming up more often lately, and I'm kind of curious as to what your stance on this is the overall sort of pressure around sustainability. Is that something as an organization that you guys talk about, and how important is that to the leadership team?
We do talk about it. We tend to get pushed by some of our customers on it because they're on a sustainability campaign.
And by your customers, you're talking about like the Home Depots and the Costco's and
the big retailers. When I say customer, I'm always referring to retailers. When I say consumers, I'm talking about the ones that are buying from our customers. And so I mean, I think, to me, sustainability is just good business. It's part of developing new products. I think for us, we do use a lot of material, and we are often looking at how do we reduce waste in the manufacturing process, or even reusing things in the manufacturing process. It's just a natural part of I think it's good business because it saves you money, and but I think from a retailer's perspective, they're not immune to the impact of everything they're doing, and we might be doing on their behalf to the environment. So they want to know. I think we're doing a lot of the right things. I think there's opportunities for us to improve in terms of how we track it and justify focusing energy on it. But to me, it's a natural part of the business.
Yep. So I'm going to ask a question that on one hand, you could look at this question and be like, well, duh. But I think it's actually a really interesting one in terms of, so back to the executive team and the priorities. What role does profit play in D2C for you guys?
I mean, profit is there everywhere. I mean, it's just part of our, our reason to exist. I mean, that's why we're doing all these things. But it's also one of those areas where it can be a complex calculation, because ultimately this capability is tied to it may be tied to a specific retailer, and it's just part of their expectation that you're going to be able to deliver these capabilities.
Yeah.
And so it can be part of the overall analysis of what the relationship is, for sure.
Yeah, and the reason I asked the question, because again, it kind of seems like a little bit of a dumb question, but the we've seen a number of different approaches to, well, we just have to be there and we're just hoping to break even, right? All, to even in some scenarios, people thinking that they have to take a loss if the item that they have is really expensive to ship. Versus, on the other end of it, no, we're doing this because we want to drive profit. So I'm just kind of, it's an interesting thing in that we see brands in particular kind of all across the map in terms of what they expect out of D2C.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you, as an organization, again, to the extent that you can share, but do you expect D2C to be a highly profitable thing, sort of a, we just hope to make money type of a thing, or again, to whatever extent that you're.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's as I said, it's always part of the calculus. I think we operate the business, and I think most manufacturing companies are going to do that with an expectation of profitability, and so we're going to strive to get there. If we have challenges, we'll figure it out. I mean, one of the things I would say about this business, and it's probably true of every CPG company out there, that we will pursue and chase after solving these kinds of business issues as part of just the overall. And I don't like to go into this thinking of it as it is a capability, but it's really about back to what the customer needs, and we want to make sure that we're meeting the requirements. I mean, one of the real value props for Lasko is our ability to deliver, and so that applies all across the channels. So
yeah, I think that is really wise advice of putting yourself in the customer's shoes and looking at it from their perspective. Very good. So I guess maybe a parting question. We just have a couple minutes left here. What haven't we hit on that we should know? Like, what sort of a parting, if you're meeting with a new VP of IT or somebody just sort of stepping into this situation and you're taking them under your wing, like, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, it's another interesting question, because there's so many areas to go. I would I'm always going to go back when you ask it that way and think about the context that this is all about people and relationships. And so in the end, these are complicated conversations, complicated capabilities. You're going to run into issues along the way, and the difference between success and failure may come down to the folks that you have on your team and the partners that you have out there working with you. And knowing as you get into it that if you get into that bad spot, that they're going to do what they have to help you get over that hump, because it is a long-term run, and you're building something, and you want to make sure that you've got a good team around you to ensure that we can make a run at it, and we're not worried about it.
Yeah.
Beyond that, this space, you should expect that whatever you think you're working on right now, and you'll spend the first year of your life in that role looking at things, when you get to that 12-month mark or that 24-month mark, and it will not look like what you envisioned it to be. It just won't. I think even for you and I to be having this conversation today, I would not have envisioned it 5 years ago. I had a completely different picture of what the 5-year mark would look like.
Yeah, I think that's true in a lot of different professions. Well, Dana, thank you so much for being a part of this today. I really appreciate the wisdom and the perspective and experience you bring to this particular topic, and it was a pleasure having you on.
I thank you very much. I appreciate it a great deal. Hopefully others get some value out of it.
Yeah, so I guess with that, I'll just leave it with next month. Again, we're gonna look at Accelerate 360 a little bit and talk to Jeff Cohen over there. And if you would just remember, folks who are attending, there's a survey coming after you log off really appreciate your involvement with that. And thanks for joining us. Thanks again, Dana.
Okay. See you, Michael.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.